The first thing I noticed when I stepped back into my house was the silence. Not the ordinary kind, the soft, lived-in quiet of an 80-year-old widow's home, but a tight, watchful silence, as if the walls had inhaled and forgotten how to breathe out. My hallway rug was straight, my curtains drawn the way I always leave them, and yet my skin prickled. Then I saw it. The small mahogany box on the console table was open. The velvet inside was empty. My husband's Hamilton pocket watch was gone. Hello, my dear ones. I'm Grace. When I heard Doris's story, my hands trembled. At 80, coming home to this isn't about things. It's about dignity. If you believe older women deserve safety, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Listen closely. I stood in the doorway longer than I care to admit. At my age, people assume confusion comes easily, that we misplace, misremember, misunderstand. I have never been a confused woman. I keep my spices in alphabetical order and my documents in a fireproof tin labeled in fountain pen. If something is out of place, I know it. I set my overnight bag down slowly and walked to the console table. The box wasn't just open. It was turned slightly to the left, angled toward the mirror. I always keep it parallel to the edge. I reached inside as if the watch might somehow reappear beneath my fingers. Nothing but dust and the faint smell of old velvet. I didn't panic, not yet. I walked through the house methodically, room by room. Living room, nothing obvious missing. Kitchen, my copper kettle still hanging above the stove, the porcelain jar of Darjeeling untouched. Bedroom. Bed made the way I left it, hospital corners sharp. But when I opened my dresser drawer, the one where I keep the tin of letters tied with pale blue ribbon, my stomach folded in on itself. The tin was gone. I sat down on the edge of my bed. The quilt beneath my palms felt suddenly unfamiliar, like I was touching someone else's life. 2 days. I had been gone 2 days, visiting my friend Eleanor across town. We had eaten clafoutis in her sunroom and argued gently about politics. I had slept in her guest room with the lace curtains, and while I was sipping chamomile from her bone china cup, someone had been here. I checked the back door. Locked. Windows latched. No broken glass, no splintered frames. Whoever entered my house had done so calmly, carefully, with access. That thought landed heavier than the missing watch. I went back to the hallway and crouched slowly. My knees complain these days, but they still obey. The faintest smudge marked the floor near the console table. Not mud, more like a dark scuff from a rubber sole. I don't wear rubber soles indoors. I prefer my soft leather slippers. I straightened and inhaled. There it was. A scent I didn't recognize. Something sharp, layered over sweetness. Bergamot, perhaps, mixed with a cheap aftershave. It didn't belong to my house. My home smells like lemon oil and old books. 3 things were gone. The pocket watch, the tin of letters, and from the small shelf in the sitting room, the carved porcelain nettuke my sister brought me from Kyoto in 1978. It had no great monetary value, but it had history pressed into its curves. Whoever took it hadn't grabbed random electronics or silverware. They had selected. My first instinct was to call Eleanor. My fingers hovered over the phone longer than they should have. If someone had watched me leave for her house, they would have known I'd be gone overnight. They would have known I trusted her. I dialed. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice bright. Too bright. Doris, did you get home safely? Yes, I said evenly. I did. Eleanor, did anyone stop by your place while I was there? Anyone asking about me? A pause. Just half a second. But at 80, you learn to hear the weight of silence. No, of course not, she laughed. Why on earth would they? I looked at the open box again. Because someone was in my house. The brightness drained from her tone. Oh, Doris, surely you're mistaken. You've been tired lately. Tired. I have outlived a husband, 2 brothers, and most of my illusions. Tired is not the same as mistaken. I'm not mistaken, I said quietly. 3 items are missing. She exhaled sharply. Well, call the police then. I'm sure it's nothing. Nothing. After we hung up, I didn't move for several minutes. My heart beat steadily, not frantic, not weak. Steady. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stared out at the street. Mrs. Alvarez's curtains fluttered across the way. A delivery truck rolled past. Ordinary life carried on as if my world hadn't tilted a few degrees off its axis. Then I noticed something else. My key tray. It sat by the door just where I left it. My house key, my mailbox key, and the small brass spare I keep tucked behind the others. I picked them up. The brass spare felt slightly warmer than the rest, as though it had been handled recently. I don't use that one, not unless absolutely necessary. A careful person would return a key after using it. A careful person would assume an old woman wouldn't notice. I set the keys back down and reached for my phone again. This time, not to call Eleanor. This time, to call the police. The police officer who arrived looked about 35, with kind eyes and the sort of polite patience people reserve for children and the elderly. He stepped into my hallway, glanced around once, and gave me a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Ma'am, you said 3 items are missing? Yes, I replied. A Hamilton pocket watch in a mahogany box, a tin of letters tied with blue ribbon, and a porcelain nettook from Japan. He scribbled in his notebook. Any signs of forced entry? No. Windows secure? Yes. He nodded slowly, the way people do when they're about to say something they think is gentle. Sometimes, Mrs. Hale. Mrs. Hale. Sometimes we misplace sentimental items, especially if we've recently traveled. There it was. The soft suggestion. The possibility that the problem was not intrusion, but me. I did not misplace a mahogany box, I said evenly. Nor did I misplace a carved porcelain figurine that has sat on the same shelf since 1981. He cleared his throat. Do you have anyone who might have a key? Family? A cleaning service? I felt the faintest tightening in my chest. Only my son has a key. And Eleanor. For emergencies. He wrote that down more quickly. Has anyone been in your home recently? I was away for 2 days. And who knew you'd be gone? My friend Eleanor. I paused. And my son, Daniel. The officer nodded again. We'll file a report. Without signs of forced entry, it may be difficult to pursue. But if the items show up at pawn shops, we'll be notified. Difficult to pursue. That's what happens when you grow old. Your losses become difficult. After he left, the house felt even quieter than before. I locked the door carefully and stood there with my hand resting on the knob. My reflection in the mirror across the hall looked steady. White hair pinned back neatly, navy cardigan. A woman who had once run a small accounting firm for 22 years without a single audit issue. I am not fragile, I thought. I walked back into the living room and began looking, not for what was missing, but for what was wrong. The cushions on my armchair were slightly compressed on the right side. I always sit centered. The lace doily on the side table was shifted half an inch. That faint scent, Bergamot layered with synthetic musk still lingered. It clung faintly to the air near the hallway. Whoever entered had not rushed. They had moved calmly, looked around. Perhaps even sat down. That thought chilled me more than the theft itself. I went into the kitchen and opened my small, leather-bound planner. I wrote down the exact times I had left for Eleanor's house and when I returned. Then I checked my phone. Eleanor had texted me the afternoon before. Still at the cafe with Marjorie. You relax and enjoy your book. The timestamp struck me. It was sent at 3:14 p.m. Yesterday, according to Mrs. Alvarez across the street, a car had been parked in front of my house for a little while, around 3. She had mentioned it casually last week when we spoke about a broken sprinkler head. I hadn't thought about it until now. I stepped outside. Mrs. Alvarez was watering her roses, wearing a wide straw hat and humming softly. "Good afternoon, Doris," she called. "Good afternoon," I replied, walking closer. "Can I ask you something peculiar?" She smiled. "You may ask me anything." "Yesterday, did you happen to notice a vehicle parked in front of my house?" She paused, thinking. "Yes, actually. A gray sedan. I assumed you were home. Did you see who got out?" Her brows knit together. "A young man. Tall? Dark jacket? He had a tote bag. I thought perhaps your grandson." "I don't have a grandson," I said quietly. Her humming stopped. "He used a key," she added slowly. "I remember, because I saw him unlock the door. I wouldn't have thought twice otherwise." Used a key. My pulse didn't spike. It narrowed. "Do you remember what time?" "Just after 3, I believe. I was trimming the hydrangeas." 3:14. I thanked her and returned inside, closing the door with deliberate care. My mind felt strangely clear, as if a fog had lifted and revealed the edges of something sharp. Eleanor said she was at a cafe at 3:14 p.m. A young man entered my home at just after 3. Eleanor's nephew, Marcus, was tall. He favored dark jackets, and he carried his belongings in a canvas tote with frayed handles. I had seen it last week when he visited her house unannounced. I walked to my key tray again and picked up the small brass spare. It looked identical to the others, but a copied key often leaves faint filing marks along the teeth. I carried it to the window where the afternoon light was strongest. There, barely visible, fine scratches near the ridges. Not factory smooth. Altered. I felt something settle inside me then. Not fear. Recognition. This was not random. This was not a confused old woman forgetting where she placed her treasures. This was deliberate. And if someone believed that being 80 made me easy prey, they had made a very grave miscalculation. I did not call Eleanor again that afternoon. Instead, I called my son. Daniel answered on the second ring, breathless, as if I had interrupted something important. "Mom? Is everything okay?" "No," I said calmly. "It is not. Someone entered my house while I was away." A pause, then a sigh. "Mom, are you sure?" There it was again, that careful tone. "Yes, Daniel, I am sure." "What's missing?" I listed the items. He was quiet for a moment, then gave a short laugh that scraped against my nerves. "Mom, the watch? You haven't worn that in years. That doesn't make it disposable." "I didn't say disposable. I just mean, maybe you put it somewhere safe and forgot." I did not forget. Silence again. I could almost see him rubbing his forehead the way he does when he thinks I'm being stubborn. Okay, okay. Did you call the police? Yes. And? They filed a report. Another sigh. Mom, maybe it's time we talk about some things. Such as? Well, you living alone. You've had a few little incidents lately. What incidents? My voice sharpened. You locked yourself out last winter. Because the lock froze. And you forgot your phone at the grocery store. I left it in the cart for 3 minutes. He hesitated. I just worry. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the lemon tree outside the window. Its leaves were glossy, stubbornly alive even in February. Daniel, I said softly, do you have a copy of my key? Of course I do. For emergencies. Have you used it recently? The silence this time was longer. No. Why would I? I'm asking. I haven't, Mom. His answer came too quickly, too neatly. Have you lent it to anyone? Of course not. His voice rose, defensive. Why would I give someone your key? I don't know, I replied. Why would anyone have one? He exhaled sharply. Mom, don't start accusing people, especially Eleanor. She's been nothing but kind to you. Kind. Yes, I murmured. She has. After we hung up, I remained still for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. Daniel had not asked what the letters contained. He had not asked why the neduke mattered. He had focused on whether I was sure. I changed my cardigan, slipped on my sensible navy flats, and picked up my handbag. If someone believed I would sit quietly and wait for reassurance, they misunderstood me profoundly. Eleanor lived only 15 minutes away, in a tidy bungalow with blue shutters and an over-watered lawn. When I pulled into her driveway, I noticed a gray sedan parked along the curb. My fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Marcus's car. I rang the bell. Eleanor opened the door with her usual theatrical warmth. Doris, what a surprise! Behind her, I could see Marcus in the living room, perched on the arm of the sofa, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when he heard my voice. Oh, hi, Mrs. Hale. He wore a dark jacket, canvas tote at his feet. May I come in? I asked. Of course, Eleanor said quickly, stepping aside. The house smelled of cinnamon and something baked, perhaps galette. The familiarity of it felt almost mocking. I wanted to ask you both something, I said, remaining standing. Marcus shifted slightly. When I was here 2 days ago, I mentioned the pocket watch Harold left me, didn't I? Eleanor smiled tightly. You did? Such a sentimental piece. Yes. It's gone. Marcus's gaze flickered, just for a second. Gone? Eleanor repeated. Oh, Doris, that's awful. Mrs. Alvarez saw a young man unlock my door yesterday at 3 in the afternoon, I said evenly. With a key. The room grew very still. Marcus straightened. Lots of young men exist, Mrs. Hale. Indeed they do. Eleanor gave a strained laugh. Surely you're not suggesting— I am not suggesting anything, I interrupted gently. I am observing. Marcus's jaw tightened. Are you accusing me of something? I am asking whether you have ever held my house key. No, he snapped. Have you ever seen it? No. You seem certain. Because I haven't. His foot nudged the tote bag slightly. The canvas was the same shade I remembered. Eleanor stepped forward, her tone turning firm. Doris, this is inappropriate. Marcus would never. How do you know? I asked quietly. She faltered. I let the silence stretch, thin and taut as wire. Then I smiled faintly. If you hear anything about a Hamilton watch appearing anywhere, do let me know." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out. As I reached my car, I felt eyes on my back. I did not hurry. I did not look over my shoulder. Inside, my heartbeat was steady. Marcus had reacted not with confusion, but with irritation. And irritation, in my experience, is the mask of exposure. I did not drive straight home. Instead, I turned left at the next intersection and headed toward Main Street. If someone had copied my key, I wanted to understand how. The locksmith's shop sat between a laundromat and a narrow bakery that sold almond biscotti so hard they could break a molar. A small brass bell chimed when I entered. The air smelled faintly of oil and metal shavings. A middle-aged man with silver at his temples looked up from behind the counter. "Afternoon, ma'am. What can I help you with?" "I have a question," I said, placing my small brass key on the counter. "If someone were to copy this without my knowledge, would there be any visible sign?" He picked it up, adjusting his glasses. He turned it under the light, running a thumb along the teeth. "Sometimes," he said. "Depends on how careful they were." He reached beneath the counter and pulled out a magnifying lens. "Factory cuts are smooth. A duplicated key often leaves micro-abrasions along the edges, filing marks, tiny inconsistencies." I watched as he rotated it slowly. "There," he murmured, pointing with a thin tool. "See this slight roughness? And here. Not terrible work, but not original." My stomach did not drop. It hardened. "So it's been copied," I said. "Yes, ma'am." "Recently?" He shrugged gently. "Impossible to say." I thanked him, paid for the consultation he insisted was unnecessary, and stepped back into the daylight. The world moved on as usual. Cars passing, a woman walking her poodle, someone laughing near the cafe. I felt oddly separate from it all, as if I were observing through glass. Someone with access had copied my key. Access. Only 2 people officially had it. When I reached home, I did not enter immediately. I stood at the edge of my small front garden, staring at the windows. The curtains were drawn as I had left them. The facade was unchanged, but my perception of it had shifted entirely. My home was no longer just a sanctuary. It was evidence. Inside, I moved carefully. I opened drawers I rarely touched. I checked the small porcelain dish near the sink where I keep loose change. A few quarters were missing, not enough to notice casually, enough to test. They had been probing. I went to the hallway closet and examined the shelf where I keep my important documents. The fireproof tin remained, undisturbed. That told me something else. Whoever entered was selective. They knew what to take and what not to. I sat down at the dining table and allowed myself 1 minute of anger. Not wild anger, not the kind that burns uncontrollably, the quiet, disciplined kind, the kind that once helped me negotiate contracts twice my size when I ran my firm. 80 does not mean powerless. I replayed the conversation at Eleanor's house, Marcus's immediate defensiveness, the flicker in his eyes when I mentioned the time, the tote bag at his feet, Eleanor's overeagerness to call my suspicion inappropriate, and Daniel's voice on the phone. "You've had a few little incidents lately." I leaned back in my chair. If someone wanted to frame this as confusion, they would need repetition, a pattern, a narrative that Doris Hale was slipping. Was this about objects, or was it about positioning? The thought slid into place slowly. If I were perceived as forgetful, unstable, unsafe alone, then suggestions about managing my affairs would seem reasonable. I rose and walked to my desk. I opened my leather planner again and wrote 3 names in careful script. Eleanor Whitcomb, Marcus Whitcomb, Daniel Hale. I did not circle them. I did not underline. I simply let the ink settle into the page. Then I did something small, but deliberate. From the cabinet above my pantry, I removed a small velvet pouch containing a vintage Bakelite bracelet I had not worn in years. It was striking, deep amber, chunky, impossible to ignore. Not especially valuable, but eye-catching. I placed it inside a decorative wooden box in my bedroom. I left the lid slightly ajar. Beside it, I placed a thin strip of nearly invisible thread stretched across the inner edge of the drawer. If opened, it would snap. And at the base of the door, I taped a tiny brass bell, barely noticeable, silent unless disturbed. I moved slowly, methodically, not out of paranoia, out of preparation. If someone believed they could enter my home unnoticed, they would try again, and this time, I would be ready. I did not have to wait long. The next morning, just after 9, my phone rang while I was slicing a pear into precise, even wedges. The number was familiar. 2 houses down. Doris? It was Mr. Hargrove. His voice sounded tight. I hope I'm not overstepping. You're not, I said calmly. Tell me. He lowered his voice. Someone was at your house last night. My hand froze over the cutting board. At what time? Just after 8. I was taking the trash out. I saw a man at your door. Tall, dark jacket. He used a key. My pulse narrowed again, that same focused compression. Did he stay long? About 15 minutes. He came out carrying something small, looked like a box. The wooden one in my bedroom. Did he notice you? I asked. No. I stayed behind the hedge. I thought maybe it was family. A pause. Doris, is everything all right? Yes, I said. Thank you for telling me. When I hung up, I did not rush to the bedroom. I washed my hands, dried them carefully, and placed the knife back in its slot. Then I walked down the hallway. The house felt ordinary. Sunlight pooled gently across the rug. The faint smell of lemon oil lingered from the night before. In the bedroom, I knelt slowly and opened the drawer. The thread was broken. The wooden box sat exactly where I had left it, except the lid was now fully closed. I lifted it. Empty. The Bakelite bracelet was gone. I exhaled through my nose. So, they had returned, confident, curious, testing. I crouched lower and ran my fingers along the baseboard near the door. The tiny brass bell had shifted slightly out of alignment, disturbed, but carefully repositioned. Whoever entered had noticed nothing, or believed they had. I sat back on my heels and allowed the reality to settle fully. Marcus. No random burglar returns to the same house within 24 hours. No stranger moves calmly through rooms, selecting sentimental items first and flashy trinkets second. This wasn't desperation. It was entitlement. I stood and walked to the kitchen, picking up the phone once more. This time, I dialed Eleanor. She answered quickly. Doris? Good morning, I said pleasantly. I wanted to thank you for yesterday's galette. It was quite good. A small pause. You're welcome. I also wanted to ask, where was Marcus last night? Silence. I don't keep track of his every movement, she replied carefully. Of course not. Why? Because someone entered my home again. Her breath caught faintly. Again? Yes, around 8. With a key. That's impossible. Is it? Her voice sharpened. Doris, this is becoming absurd. Absurd, I repeated softly. You can't just accuse people because you're upset. I haven't accused anyone. Well, it feels like you are. I leaned back against the counter. Eleanor, if Marcus were innocent, would he be angry or confused? What do you mean? Would he demand to know why someone is impersonating him? Or would he grow defensive? She said nothing. Please ask him where he was at 8 p.m. Yesterday, I continued gently. And ask him whether he's recently acquired an amber bakelite bracelet. Her tone hardened completely. You're being paranoid. Perhaps, I said, but paranoia does not snap threads inside drawers. I ended the call before she could respond. My house no longer felt violated. It felt staged. This second entry changed everything. It meant they were comfortable. It meant they believed I either wouldn't notice or wouldn't act. I walked to my desk and opened my planner again. Under the 3 names, I added a 4th line. Pawn shops. If Marcus was bold enough to return for something eye-catching, he would likely convert it quickly. Small items. Easy cash. No attachment. I retrieved my handbag and my coat. This was no longer about sentiment. This was about proof. As I stepped out the front door, I glanced at Mr. Hargrove's house. His curtain shifted slightly, and I gave him a small nod. Witnesses matter. And for the first time since this began, I felt something close to certainty. They had made their second mistake. The pawn shops downtown open early. By 10:30, I was already on my 3rd storefront, the bell above each door announcing me with a metallic jingle that sounded almost accusatory. Glass cases lined the counters, gold chains, mismatched earrings, old watches displayed like abandoned time itself. In the first 2 shops, I kept my voice light. Has anyone brought in a vintage amber bakelite bracelet recently? I described it precisely. Chunky, deep honey color, faint marbling near the clasp. I did not give my name. Both clerks shook their heads. The 3rd shop was narrower, dimmer. A ceiling fan turned lazily overhead. The man behind the counter had careful eyes, observant eyes. I'm not here to cause trouble, I began. I'm looking for something that may have been sold without the owner's consent. His expression shifted slightly. What kind of item? He asked. I described the bracelet again. This time, I added, and possibly a Hamilton pocket watch. Old. Gold case. Inscription inside. The fan creaked overhead. He leaned back slightly. You got a police report? Yes. He nodded once. Give me the number. I recited it calmly. He turned to a computer behind him and typed slowly. His fingers paused midway. His eyes flicked toward me, then back to the screen. You said Hamilton? He asked again. Yes. He exhaled through his nose. Had a young guy come in yesterday afternoon. Tried to offload something similar. Didn't have paperwork. I told him I don't take high-risk items without ID and documentation. My spine straightened. What did he look like? Late 20s? Dark jacket, nervous energy. Kept checking his phone. A pause. Had a tote bag? Of course he did. Did he leave the item here? I asked. No. When I asked for ID and proof of ownership, he backed off. Said he'd think about it. And the bracelet? The man tilted his head slightly. Small amber piece? Yeah, that one he sold. My pulse did not race. It sharpened again, like a blade honed to precision. Do you still have it? He studied me carefully. You really have that report? Yes. He turned and unlocked a drawer beneath the counter. From inside, he lifted a small plastic evidence bag with a white sticker attached. My bracelet. Even through the plastic, I recognized the marbled swirl near the clasp. My fingers curled slightly, but I kept my voice steady. That is mine. He placed it on the counter but did not slide it toward me. I'll need confirmation from the police before releasing it. That's reasonable, I said. He hesitated. You want to know something? Yes. He seemed too comfortable, like he thought no one would question him. That's usually not random theft. I held his gaze. It isn't. As I left the shop, the air outside felt cooler than before. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting the reality settle. Marcus had tried to sell the watch but failed. He had succeeded with the bracelet. That meant two things. First, he needed quick cash. Second, he believed I would not follow the trail. I walked toward my car slowly, replaying every detail. The timeline aligned perfectly. 3:14 p.m., entry. 8 p.m., second entry. Following morning, pawn attempt. But something else gnawed at me. Why take the letters? The watch had value. The bracelet could be sold. But the tin of letters? They held nothing but handwriting, decades-old ink pressed into paper. Sentiment, yes, but no resale worth, unless someone was searching for something inside them. A document, a signature, a record. I stopped walking. If someone were planning to question my mental clarity, to suggest I was losing track of important papers, removing personal correspondence could create confusion, gaps, a narrative. I drove home without turning on the radio. When I entered the house, I went straight to the hallway mirror and studied my reflection again. 80 years old. Clear eyes, steady breath. They had underestimated not my strength, but my patience. I picked up my phone and dialed Daniel. He answered more quickly this time. Mom? I went to a pawn shop today, I said evenly. Silence. They confirmed Marcus attempted to sell Harold's watch. The silence deepened. Daniel, I continued softly, before I involve the police further, I'm giving you one opportunity to tell me the truth. On the other end of the line, I heard him inhale, and for the first time, I sensed something crack. Daniel did not answer immediately. I could hear him breathing, faint and uneven, as if he had stepped away from something or someone. Mom, he said finally, his voice lower than before. This is getting out of hand. No, I replied calmly. It is getting clearer. You went to a pawn shop? Why would you do that? Because I prefer facts to reassurances. Another pause. I imagined him rubbing his forehead again, pacing perhaps. Marcus is going through a rough time. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. Not denial, context. A rough time does not entitle him to my property. He didn't mean... He attempted to sell Harold's watch, I interrupted quietly. The clerk confirmed it. Silence. He said you'd misplaced things before, Daniel muttered at last. I felt something inside me shift. Not shock, not heartbreak, but recognition. So he has discussed me. He was worried, Daniel insisted weakly. He said you seemed confused lately. I see. I walked slowly into the living room and sat down in my armchair, the right side, deliberately. Daniel, did you give him access to my key? No. Did he ever handle your copy? I don't think so. That is not the same answer. He exhaled sharply. He might have seen it once, when he borrowed my car. It was on the ring. Borrowed. How long did he borrow your car? Overnight, a couple weeks ago. And you did not think to mention that? It didn't seem relevant. Relevant. I studied the sunlight across the carpet. It revealed every fiber, every faint footprint. Did you tell him I would be staying at Eleanor's for 2 days? Daniel hesitated again. Yes. The admission landed like a stone dropped into still water. He asked casually, Daniel rushed on. Just making conversation. Of course. Mom, he wouldn't. He already has. My voice remained steady, but I felt the steel in it now. Daniel, listen to me carefully. This is no longer about Marcus being irresponsible. This is about premeditated entry into my home. Twice! You're making this sound criminal. It is criminal. Silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. He thought, Daniel began slowly, he thought maybe you wouldn't notice. I almost smiled. That assumption was his first mistake. And if you did notice, Daniel continued, quieter now, he thought maybe it would support the idea that you're slipping. There it was, spoken aloud. So that later, I said softly, finishing the thought, if someone suggested I needed help managing my affairs, it would seem reasonable. Daniel did not respond. Was that discussed? I asked. No. His denial came too fast. Not like that. Like what then? He just said you shouldn't be alone forever. That maybe someone should oversee things. He was concerned about your investments. The house. The house? I see. My fingers traced the edge of the armrest slowly. Daniel, did you agree with him? I worry about you. Worry, I repeated quietly. Or opportunity. That's not fair. Is it? He fell silent again. I did not shout. I did not accuse further. At 80, you learn that raised voices waste energy. Silence invites confession. Mom, he said finally, what are you going to do? I stood and walked toward the hallway mirror once more. The woman staring back at me did not look fragile. She looked measured. I am going to gather proof, I said. And then? And then, I replied calmly, I am going to make sure no one ever mistakes my clarity for weakness again. I ended the call. The pieces were aligning now. Marcus had copied the key when he borrowed Daniel's car. Daniel had told him my travel plans. Eleanor had provided the comfortable setting, someone I trusted, someone who could vouch for me being forgetful if needed. It was not chaotic theft. It was strategic. I returned to my desk and opened the planner again. Beneath the 4 names, I added a 5th word: documentation. If they wanted a narrative of confusion, I would create a narrative of precision. I picked up my phone once more, but this time not to call family. I called an attorney I had not spoken to in years. The attorney's name was Margaret Klein. I had recommended her to 3 clients 15 years ago when I was still working, and I remembered her as sharp, unsentimental, and allergic to nonsense. She answered on the 3rd ring. Margaret Klein. This is Doris Hale. A brief pause, and then warmth edged with respect. Doris Hale. I haven't heard that name in a while. I require discretion, I said calmly. And strategy. That sounds serious. It is. We met that afternoon in her office, a quiet suite above a pharmacy that smelled faintly of antiseptic and eucalyptus. Margaret had aged well, silver streaks in her hair, posture straight as ever. I laid everything out without embellishment. The copied key, the pawnshop confirmation, Daniel's admissions. The second entry. She listened without interrupting, fingers steepled beneath her chin. When I finished, she asked one question. Do you want reconciliation, or do you want control? Control, I answered without hesitation. She nodded once. Then we document everything, quietly, and we let them believe they're ahead. I felt a flicker of satisfaction at that. First, she continued, you change your locks, immediately. Not just the cylinder, the entire mechanism. Second, we draft an updated estate directive and financial power of attorney, naming someone neutral, not family. I have someone in mind, I said. Good. Third, you do not confront further.